3 days and everything is mine." The dial tone came through the receiver just as I was standing outside the bedroom door, holding a glass of warm milk, the one she always drank before sleep. The door wasn't fully closed. A narrow gap remained, and through it spilled the buttery yellow light of her bedside lamp, painting a long slender stripe across the dark wooden floor. I had only meant to hand her the milk, say, "Sleep well," the way I had on 1,000 nights before, and let another unremarkable day come to its quiet close. But just as I raised my hand to knock, I heard her voice. Low. Soft. As though she was afraid the walls might overhear. "Finally, in 3 days, everything will be mine." The words pierced like the finest needle, slipping through my eardrum and traveling all the way to my chest, coming to rest somewhere near my heart, not deep enough to kill, but lodged there all the same. My hand didn't tremble around the glass. My breathing didn't falter. But my entire body froze, as if someone had pressed pause, and I stood rooted before that half-open door. She had no idea I was listening. I couldn't make out what the person on the other end said, but her next words followed close behind. It's all arranged. He has no idea. Same as always." She let out a light laugh, that laugh I knew so well. The same easy, cheerful sound she made when she watered the plants on the balcony or stirred a pot of soup in the kitchen. But now, that laugh traveling into my ears carried a meaning I had never perceived before. Footsteps moved across the room, heading toward the door. I stepped back half a pace, leaning sideways against the hallway wall, pretending I had just come from the study. The door swung open. She stood there in her cream-colored robe, her hair loose over her shoulders. When she saw me, her expression betrayed nothing unusual. She even curved her lips in a small smile. "Standing out here. Come in." I held up the glass. "Milk. Heated it for you." She took it, her fingertips grazing the back of my hand. Normal temperature. No sweat. No tremor. She lifted the glass and took a small sip, then looked up at me, her eyes bright in the lamplight, like black grapes submerged in clear water. "Thanks, honey," she said. I'd heard those 2 words from her countless times. Every single one had once made me feel warm. But this time, the way they lingered in the air had shifted, like an extra gear slipped into a finely calibrated machine, turning with a faint, discordant grinding sound. "Sleep well," I said. You too." She carried the milk back into the bedroom, and the door closed slowly behind her. The last sliver of light vanished from the gap as she walked to the bed, set the glass on the nightstand, and reached out to switch off the lamp. Darkness took over. I stood in the hallway, the residual warmth of the glass still clinging to my palm. The living room clock ticked through the silence, a dull, steady rhythm. Slowly, one step at a time, I walked back to the study, closed the door, and sat down in my desk chair without turning on the light. Beyond the window lay the midnight cityscape. Scattered lights gleamed from distant high-rises, like diamonds dropped onto black velvet. I stared at those lights for a long time, my mind looping the words over and over. "In 3 days, everything will be mine." What did that mean? Everything, what? The house. The savings. Something else entirely. And what exactly had she arranged? I began rummaging through the drawers of memory, searching for the anomalous traces I had overlooked, buried beneath the sediment of our daily routines. But the more I searched, the more tangled everything became. 7 years of marriage felt like a book I'd thumbed through too many times, its spine cracking, its pages curling at the edges. I knew its contents too well, so well that even the smallest deviation now blazed with accusation. In that book, I found too many things smoothed over by time, words she'd said, things she'd done, expressions that had crossed her face, all replaying in my head like a skipping record, looping the same melody. I thought back to the first time we met. It was an autumn evening, rain hammering down in thick sheets. People crowded under the awning of the library entrance, trying to stay dry. She stood at the front of the huddle in a khaki trench coat, collar popped up, chin tucked in like a cat trapped by the downpour. I had just walked out of the library with a large black umbrella. As I passed her, I hesitated, then held out the umbrella. She looked up at me. In those eyes, surprise, a touch of uncertainty, and something else, a clarity that seemed intensified by the rain. "What about you?" she asked. "I live right across the street," I said. A quick dash. She smiled, her lips pressing together, and a faint dimple appeared on her left cheek. "Let's walk together," she said. "The umbrella's big enough." We walked those 200 yards side by side, rain drumming a fast, frantic rhythm against the canopy. She smelled faintly of jasmine, the scent sharper and cleaner when dampened by the rain. The wind whipped her coat hem, and she reached down to hold it in place, her elbow brushing against me. She pulled away quickly, the tips of her ears flushing, but she didn't apologize, she just lowered her head and kept walking. When we reached her building, she stood under the portico and handed the umbrella back. Water dripped from the metal ribs, pooling at our feet. "Thank you," she said. "I'll buy you coffee sometime." I was about to say she didn't have to, but her eyes in that dim evening light were too bright. Bright enough that I forgot how to refuse. I just nodded. 3 days and everything is mine. The dial tone came through the receiver just as I was standing outside the bedroom door, holding a glass of warm milk, the one she always drank before sleep. The door wasn't fully closed. A narrow gap remained, and through it spilled the buttery yellow light of her bedside lamp, painting a long slender stripe across the dark wooden floor. I had only meant to hand her the milk, say, "Sleep well," the way I had on 1,000 nights before, and let another unremarkable day come to its quiet close. But just as I raised my hand to knock, I heard her voice. Low. Soft. As though she was afraid the walls might overhear. "Finally, in 3 days, everything will be mine." The words pierced like the finest needle, slipping through my eardrum and traveling all the way to my chest, coming to rest somewhere near my heart, not deep enough to kill, but lodged there all the same. My hand didn't tremble around the glass. My breathing didn't falter. But my entire body froze, as if someone had pressed pause, and I stood rooted before that half-open door. She had no idea I was listening. I couldn't make out what the person on the other end said, but her next words followed close behind. It's all arranged. He has no idea. Same as always." She let out a light laugh, that laugh I knew so well. The same easy, cheerful sound she made when she watered the plants on the balcony or stirred a pot of soup in the kitchen. But now, that laugh traveling into my ears carried a meaning I had never perceived before. Footsteps moved across the room, heading toward the door. I stepped back half a pace, leaning sideways against the hallway wall, pretending I had just come from the study. The door swung open. She stood there in her cream-colored robe, her hair loose over her shoulders. When she saw me, her expression betrayed nothing unusual. She even curved her lips in a small smile. "Standing out here. Come in." I held up the glass. "Milk. Heated it for you." She took it, her fingertips grazing the back of my hand. Normal temperature. No sweat. No tremor. She lifted the glass and took a small sip, then looked up at me, her eyes bright in the lamplight, like black grapes submerged in clear water. "Thanks, honey," she said. I'd heard those 2 words from her countless times. Every single one had once made me feel warm. But this time, the way they lingered in the air had shifted, like an extra gear slipped into a finely calibrated machine, turning with a faint, discordant grinding sound. "Sleep well," I said. You too." She carried the milk back into the bedroom, and the door closed slowly behind her. The last sliver of light vanished from the gap as she walked to the bed, set the glass on the nightstand, and reached out to switch off the lamp. Darkness took over. I stood in the hallway, the residual warmth of the glass still clinging to my palm. The living room clock ticked through the silence, a dull, steady rhythm. Slowly, one step at a time, I walked back to the study, closed the door, and sat down in my desk chair without turning on the light. Beyond the window lay the midnight cityscape. Scattered lights gleamed from distant high-rises, like diamonds dropped onto black velvet. I stared at those lights for a long time, my mind looping the words over and over. In 3 days, everything will be mine. What did that mean? Everything, what? The house. The savings. Something else entirely. And what exactly had she arranged? I began rummaging through the drawers of memory, searching for the anomalous traces I had overlooked, buried beneath the sediment of our daily routines. But the more I searched, the more tangled everything became. 7 years of marriage felt like a book I'd thumbed through too many times, its spine cracking, its pages curling at the edges. I knew its contents too well, so well that even the smallest deviation now blazed with accusation. In that book, I found too many things smoothed over by time, words she'd said, things she'd done, expressions that had crossed her face, all replaying in my head like a skipping record, looping the same melody. I thought back to the first time we met. It was an autumn evening, rain hammering down in thick sheets. People crowded under the awning of the library entrance, trying to stay dry. She stood at the front of the huddle in a khaki trench coat, collar popped up, chin tucked in like a cat trapped by the downpour. I had just walked out of the library with a large black umbrella. As I passed her, I hesitated, then held out the umbrella. She looked up at me. In those eyes, surprise, a touch of uncertainty, and something else, a clarity that seemed intensified by the rain. "What about you?" she asked. "I live right across the street," I said. A quick dash. She smiled, her lips pressing together, and a faint dimple appeared on her left cheek. "Let's walk together," she said. "The umbrella's big enough." We walked those 200 yards side by side, rain drumming a fast, frantic rhythm against the canopy. She smelled faintly of jasmine, the scent sharper and cleaner when dampened by the rain. The wind whipped her coat hem, and she reached down to hold it in place, her elbow brushing against me. She pulled away quickly, the tips of her ears flushing, but she didn't apologize, she just lowered her head and kept walking. When we reached her building, she stood under the portico and handed the umbrella back. Water dripped from the metal ribs, pooling at our feet. "Thank you," she said. "I'll buy you coffee sometime." I was about to say she didn't have to, but her eyes in that dim evening light were too bright. Bright enough that I forgot how to refuse. I just nodded.
I set down the phone, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes. Outside, rain had started falling, tapping against the windowpane with a soft, rustling sound, like insects nibbling at something in the dark. I listened to that rain, and the place in my chest where the needle had lodged began to truly ache, not a sharp pain, but a dull, slow throb, as if something inside me was swelling, pressing against my ribs until they felt too tight. I don't remember when I fell asleep that night. I woke to find myself slumped over my desk, the computer screen still glowing, a blinking cursor on a blank document. My neck was stiff as iron. I pushed myself up slowly, my joints cracking. When I walked out of the study, breakfast was already on the table. She was in the kitchen in a light blue house dress, her hair loosely tied back, frying eggs. The range hood hummed, oil sizzled in the pan. She held the skillet with one hand and the spatula with the other, motion smooth and practiced. She glanced up when she saw me, her mouth curving into a smile. "You're awake." Perfect timing. Eggs just finished. I sat down. In front of me was a perfectly fried sunny-side egg, 2 slices of toast, a small fruit salad, and a steaming mug of black coffee. Everything arranged exactly as it always was, even the thickness of the butter on the bread. She sat across from me with a glass of milk, caught my eye for a second, then looked down to eat. "Sleep well?" I asked. "Yeah. You?" She lifted her gaze, pausing on my face. "You look tired. Work stuff. Stayed up late. Don't push yourself too hard." Her tone was flat, betraying no extra feeling. We ate in silence. At one point, she set down her spoon and stared out the window, her profile lit by the morning light, straight nose, softly set lips, no dimple. What was she thinking? I studied her face, the question surfacing unbidden. Was she thinking about the flight in 3 days? The apartment whose balance wasn't fully paid yet? Or the thought that tightened my chest the most, was she rehearsing how to tell me goodbye? I didn't ask. She didn't say. That morning I went to work and spent the entire morning staring at my computer screen. Papers piled up on my desk, I didn't read a word of them. A coworker tapped my shoulder and asked what was wrong. "Nothing," I said. "Just didn't sleep well." He told me to go outside and get some fresh air at lunch. I nodded, but I never left that chair. At 3 in the afternoon, I went to the break room for water. Passing the window in the corridor, I looked down at the parking lot. A young couple was walking across it hand in hand. They moved slowly, the boy leaning toward the girl as he talked, and she laughed, swatting his shoulder. Their shadows melted together on the asphalt, like 2 pieces of clay pressed into one, indistinguishable. I stood there with my cup for more than a minute, until a thought hit me. When was the last time she and I had walked like that, hand in hand? I couldn't remember. There was a gap in my memory, some vague point where all our images had shifted, leaving an arm's length between us, shoulders not touching, fingers not intertwining. The edge of that gap was clean cut, like a blade's work. But I couldn't recall when the blade had fallen. My phone buzzed. A message from her: "I might be home late tonight. Don't wait for me for dinner." I stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "Fine." After I sent it, I made a decision. I pocketed my phone, turned back to my desk, packed my things, told my supervisor I needed to leave early, and went downstairs. My car sat in the underground garage. I started the engine but didn't shift into gear. I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the faded red number painted on a concrete pillar, one thought solidifying in my mind. I had to find out where she'd been going every Tuesday night for the past 3 months. She hadn't hidden her tracks well. Maybe because she never thought I'd look, or maybe, in some part of her, she wanted me to. Her phone synced to our shared cloud album. I opened it on my computer and scrolled through her photo stream from the past 3 months. Several pictures showed a cafe I'd never seen, vintage brass lamps hanging from the ceiling, handwritten notes plastered on the walls. I zoomed in on one photo and spotted a business card tacked in the corner, an address printed on it. I typed that address into the navigation system. It took me to an alley in the Old West Side, about 40 minutes away. The voice guided me through rush hour traffic, and by the time night fully fell, I had parked at the entrance of that alley. The cafe's window glowed warm amber, a few groups of young people scattered inside. I didn't get out. I sat in my car, watching the glass door through the windshield. About 10 minutes later, she appeared. She got out of a taxi in a gray knit cardigan I'd never seen before, carrying a canvas bag, and pushed open the cafe door. She chose a seat by the window, set her bag on the chair beside her, and pulled out her phone. Through the distance, I watched her profile as she scrolled, as if waiting for someone. A server brought her water. She looked up and smiled, a natural smile, the same one she wore at home. Gentle. Unassuming. No sharp edges. A few minutes later, another woman entered. About her age, short hair, black leather jacket, walking with purpose. She sat down across from her, and the two of them broke into simultaneous smiles, not the polite smiles strangers exchange, but the easy, unguarded ones that only come between people who've known each other for years. They started talking. I couldn't hear a word, but their body language was animated. The short-haired woman gestured broadly, and she listened, nodding now and then, lifting her water glass occasionally, sometimes laughing so hard her shoulders shook. I sat in that car for nearly 40 minutes. They paid and walked out together, said a few more words on the sidewalk, hugged. The short-haired woman headed off in one direction. She pulled her cardigan tighter and walked toward the taxi stand. Streetlight pulled on her shoulders, turning the edge of that gray knit cardigan into warm, honeyed orange. She hailed a cab, climbed in, and the door closed. The tail lights disappeared around the corner. I didn't follow. I let the car idle a little longer, until the taxi's shape was completely gone, then started the engine and headed home. She was already there, watching a variety show on her tablet in the living room. She looked up. I thought you weren't coming home for dinner. Work got cancelled, I said. What about you? Did you have a good time with your friend? She paused. A short pause. Nearly invisible. Yeah, it was nice. Just catching up. She put down the tablet and stretched. I left you some dinner. It's in the fridge. Just heat it up. Thanks. She smiled. The dimple reappeared. We've been married this long, don't mention it. I watched her walk back to the bedroom, that gray cardigan spreading and closing with each step, like a wing opening and shutting for just a moment. That image fixed itself in my mind, layering over the image of her laughing in the cafe until her shoulders shook. Two versions of her. The same woman. Overlapping and separating, separating and overlapping. That night, after she drank her milk and left the glass on the nightstand, I didn't take it away immediately. Instead, I stood at the bedroom door and watched her for a few more seconds. She'd already lain down, turned toward the window, her breathing slowly leveling out. A sliver of moonlight found its way through a gap in the curtains, painting a thin silver line across the nape of her neck. I stood there until my legs began to numb, then gently pulled the door shut and returned to the living room. Monday morning. I left the house before she woke. On her pillow, I placed a sticky note. I'll come home early today. I'll make dinner. I hadn't cooked in years. My skills had probably degraded to instant noodle level, but that afternoon, I left work early, went to the supermarket, and bought ribs, ginger, rock sugar, soy sauce, and cooking wine. I looked up a recipe for braised ribs and followed it step by step. Hot oil splattered and burned the back of my hand, but I didn't stop. When she walked in that evening, the kitchen was thick with a mix of burnt smoke and caramelized sweetness. She stopped in the doorway for 2 seconds, staring at me at the apron, the unevenly browned ribs in the pot. Her expression shifted from surprise to something more ambiguous. She didn't laugh. She didn't speak. She just walked over, stood beside me, looked down into the pot, then took a pair of chopsticks from the drawer, picked up a rib, blew on it, and put it in her mouth. She chewed for a long time before swallowing. Then she turned to me, lips moving as if to say something, but nothing came. She just looked at me, her eyes glistening from steam, maybe, but there was something else too. Good? I asked. She nodded vigorously. Then she raised her hand and wiped at her eyes, as if the smoke had gotten to her. That night, we sat at the table and finished that plate of ribs. Honestly, they weren't great. Too much salt, the caramelized sugar a little burned, with faint bitter notes in places. But she ate a lot, never once complaining, even using a piece of bread to mop up the last of the sauce on the bottom of the plate. Afterward, I washed the dishes. She leaned against the doorframe and watched me. After a minute, she said, "It's been a long time since you washed dishes." I looked back over my shoulder, hands covered in suds. Has it? Her voice was quiet. The last time about a year ago. You washed one bowl, then your phone rang and you left. I did the rest. I didn't answer. The bowl I was washing turned in my hands, water running over its white surface, leaving a clean streak. More than a year. I thought I was part of this household's work, but I'd washed only one bowl. She had carried the rest alone. I started counting all the dishes I hadn't washed, but I stopped halfway. The number far exceeded what I could bear. That night before bed, she sat at her vanity applying lotion. I walked up behind her and placed my hand on her shoulder. She looked up into the mirror, and I caught a flash of alertness in her eyes there and gone so quickly I couldn't be sure it had been real. I withdrew my hand, stepped back, and said, "Sleep well." I lay down on my side first. She sat in the mirror for a few more seconds, then turned off the lamp and lay down on her side. In the dark, the space between us was about half a person's width, close enough to feel, far enough to keep from reaching out. "Honey," her voice came from that other side of darkness. "Yeah. Why did you cook today?" I paused. "I just wanted to. If I have time, I'll do it more often." She fell silent. So silent I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then her voice returned, softer than before, like a feather settling on water. "Okay." I turned to face her direction, even though I could see nothing. I opened my mouth, wanting to ask, "Xinghao, when are you leaving? What time is your flight? Is that apartment expensive, Xinghao?" But every sentence evaporated at my lips, reduced to a shallow, quiet sigh. I closed my mouth, rolled onto my back, stared at the dim ceiling shadows, and listened to her breathing gradually steady into sleep. She fell asleep first. I lay awake for a long time, listening. Tuesday. The day she was leaving. She woke later than usual. When I got up, she was already out of bed. I walked out to find her standing on the balcony, on the phone, her back to the living room, one hand resting on the railing, the other pressing the phone to her ear. The wind was strong, whipping the hem of her robe. I couldn't catch her words, only the occasional nod, in a small sound of acknowledgement. The call lasted about 10 minutes. After she hung up, she stood there another 2 minutes, looking out at the city skyline, as if seeing something beyond it, or nothing at all. I went back to the bedroom and pretended to have just woken up when she came in. She seemed calm. "Awake. I'll make breakfast." Her footsteps quickened slightly as she turned to the kitchen, as if something was pressing her. At breakfast, she ate slowly, breaking a slice of bread into 4 or 5 bites before swallowing. She glanced at me several times, each time her gaze meeting mine before sliding away, like a startled water bird skimming the surface. I thought she might say something, but she did not until she carried her plates back to the kitchen, still silent. She went to change. I sat in the living room, the TV on mute, a shopping channel showing a salesman wildly gesturing about some cookware. I stared at that flapping hand for a long time, my mind blank yet full at once. The bedroom door opened. She stepped out in a light gray dress I'd never seen before, a small pearl brooch pin at the collar. Her hair fell loose over her shoulders, the ends softly curled. She'd applied light makeup. She looked more polished than usual, or maybe I was just looking at her through the lens of hindsight, and everything had become evidence. "Dressed up." I tried to keep my voice level. "I have a meeting this afternoon," she said, touching her left earlobe. "What time will you be back?" "Not sure yet." Her gaze drifted to the window. "I won't be home for dinner. With friends. She bent down to put on her shoes, not specifying who. I didn't stand up. She knelt by the door, tying her laces, her back to me. The line of her spine beneath the gray fabric seemed unnaturally straight. She stood, tied the laces, turned to look at me. It was a short look, like a long sentence compressed into a single punctuation mark, carrying too much to unpack in that brief instant. "I'm going now," she said. "Okay." She opened the door. Early summer sunlight flooded in. She stepped out, then paused and looked back at me, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something. But she only curved her lips in a small smile and said, "See you tonight." Then she turned and walked away. The door clicked shut behind her, a soft metallic sound, like a chess piece landing on the board. I sat on the sofa without moving. The shopping program had switched to a midday news broadcast, the woman reading a storm warning about dropping temperatures. I turned off the TV, walked into the bedroom, and opened the closet. Some of her clothes were missing. Her most used suitcase was gone from the top shelf. I opened her nightstand drawer. Inside, beside the hand cream and a pack of tissues, was a white envelope. Unsealed. I pulled out a printed flight confirmation. Destination, Buenos Aires. Departure, today, 下午2点15分. Passenger name, hers. No name beside hers. I held that paper for a long time. Sunlight from the window laid a bright gold path across the floor, and motes of dust drifted in the light. The small pearl brooch she'd forgotten sat on the entryway console, refracting a soft halo. I remembered her bent neck as she tied her shoes, the curve of her lips when she'd said see you tonight, the glint of that brooch at her throat. She'd arranged everything, packed her luggage, booked her flight, scheduled the apartment's balance transfer for after she landed. She'd built herself a complete life without me, every step precise and deliberate. She'd forgotten only one thing. She'd forgotten to take the pearl brooch. I folded the confirmation and tucked it into my jacket's inner pocket. I picked up the brooch, closing my palm around it. The metal warmed against my skin, the pearl smooth and cool. I walked to the hallway mirror. The reflection showed a man in a pale blue shirt, disheveled hair, red-rimmed eyes, lips pressed tight. He looked hollowed out. But something else was forming behind those eyes, something denser and harder. 15 minutes later, I was out the door. Her car was still in the garage. She'd called a ride. I pulled out of the complex just as a white Toyota pulled up at the curb. She emerged from the building, pulling that cream-colored suitcase, the gray dress now covered by a beige trench coat. The driver helped her load the bag. She climbed into the back. The white Toyota merged onto the main road. I followed, 4 cars behind. The afternoon sun was brilliant. Plane trees on both sides shimmered, their leaves catching the light. Through 2 layers of glass, I could only see a blurry outline of her against the window, watching the city as if memorizing it for the last time. The elevated highway slowed to a crawl. The white Toyota stayed steady, never swerving or accelerating to lose me. I kept pace without difficulty, though my palms were damp. The leather steering wheel grew slick. I wiped my hands on my pants and gripped it again. After the elevated road, traffic cleared, speeds rose, and the landscape shifted from dense residential blocks to factory buildings to open, barren fields. The airport terminal emerged against the skyline, its gray curved roof like the back of a beached whale. The white Toyota pulled up at the departure curb. The driver retrieved her suitcase. She stood there for a moment, as if making a final check. Then she pulled out her phone, glanced at it, pocketed it, and walked through the sliding glass doors.
I didn't stop. I passed behind her, slowing down, watching through the passenger window, her beige coat, her loose hair lifted by the indoor air, the suitcase rolling faithfully beside her. Her stride was no different from any ordinary morning. Shoulders slightly forward, steady pace, spine straight. Familiar as a snapshot from any unremarkable day of our life together. I parked in the lot, cut the engine, and sat still. The terminal's glass wall reflected the midday sun, blindingly white. On my phone screen sat an email I'd already composed, addressed to her private account. 1 line. I'm waiting for you in departure hall B. No signature. She wouldn't know the address. But she'd check it. People with secrets are especially sensitive to anomalies. I set down the phone, took 3 deep breaths, and pushed the door open. The terminal was busier than I'd expected. Long queues snaked before check-in counters, passengers dragging luggage in every direction, boarding announcements and paging calls layering over one another. I weaved through the crowd and positioned myself by the benches in Area B. She wasn't there yet. People flowed through the entrance sliding doors, faces flickering in the sunlight, disappearing. I leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on that glass entrance. Each second stretched like a rubber band pulled to its limit, the air vibrating with tension. 7 or 8 minutes later, the doors slid open. She stepped in. Beige coat, loose hair, cream suitcase. She paused near the entrance, pulled out her phone, read something, and looked up, scanning left and right. Her gaze swept past me, and stopped. That pause lasted 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, her expression changed several times. First, confusion, recognizing something familiar but not believing her eyes. Then something tore open inside that confusion, spilling out, her pupils dilating. Then came a slow, creeping pallor, blood retreating from her skin, leaving a thin, almost transparent surface. The suitcase handle slipped from her fingers. The metal rod clattered against the tile. I walked over and stopped 3 steps away. How did you know? Her voice barely cut through the terminal noise, like a moth trapped in a glass jar. Last night, when you were on the phone, I was standing at the door, I said. You said, in 3 days, everything will be mine. She opened her mouth, closed it. Twice. Like a gear stuck in a machine. Those eyes, the ones I'd seen at the library entrance, at the cafe window, at our wedding, on countless mornings and evenings, now gathered all their light inward, like tidewater receding from the shore, leaving only wet, empty sand. The apartment, I continued, in Buenos Aires. The down payment came from our joint savings. Balance due tomorrow. You were going to wait until everything was settled before telling me, right? Her voice finally surfaced, very low. I'm sorry. 3 words. So light, like a dead leaf on water, sinking before it could ripple. Her gaze dropped to the floor. I couldn't see her face, only her hand gripping the phone, shaking slightly. The money you used to buy that apartment, I said, my own voice steadier than I'd expected, was taken from our joint account. She nodded. Barely. An acknowledgement of guilt. You weren't going to take me with you. A statement. I used every ounce of strength to keep it flat. But it still hit her. Her spine went rigid for a moment, then relaxed into a slump, shoulders caving, as if a supporting beam had been knocked out from under her. I was going to write you a letter once I got there, she said, her voice trembling at the edge of every word. I would explain everything. I packed our photos and put them in the study drawer, left a bank card behind the envelope. I thought after I left, when you found those things, you'd understand. Understand what? Understand why you were leaving. She looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her lashes wet with unshed tears. Do you know, I lived in that house for 7 years, but I felt more and more like an outsider. Every day you came home, the first thing you did was pull out your phone. The second thing was sit on the sofa and stare at it. The third thing was talk to me without looking up. Anything I told you was gone by morning. I once mentioned my stomach hurt, and you said and asked if I wanted takeout. I stood there and listened. I said nothing. 2 years ago, on my birthday, you promised you'd be home at 6. I made 5 dishes. I started at 3 in the afternoon, everything you loved. By 7:30, the food was cold, and you called to say there was a last-minute dinner, I shouldn't wait. You came back at 2 in the morning, drunk, passed out. Next day, you didn't even remember it was my birthday. Her voice grew louder, the tremor hardening into something more solid, like a spring that had been compressed too long finally releasing. Last winter, I had a 103-degree fever. I called you 6 times, you didn't answer. In the end, the convenience store guy downstairs called an ambulance. I went to the hospital alone. Got the 4 alone. Came home alone. You came back that night, saw the note I'd left, realized I'd been sick, and sat by the bed asking if I wanted hot water. Hot water. I could barely open my eyes, and you asked if I wanted hot water. The tears finally fell, running down her cheeks, gathering at the point of her chin, dropping one by one onto the front of her coat, spreading into small dark stains. She wiped at them with the back of her hand, but they kept coming, smearing her makeup. She stopped trying, just stood there crying in front of me, as if a stockpile of years had finally found its release. "It's not that I don't love you anymore," she said, her voice thickened and blurred by tears. "It's that I don't know how to keep living with you. You don't see me. I tried so many times to make you see, cooking new dishes for you to taste, putting on new clothes for you to notice, coming home late to see if you'd ask where I'd been. You never noticed. You never noticed."
The terminal PA announced another boarding call. Her voice faded into that gap, flickering like a candle in its last moment. "So I made this decision," she said, taking a breath. "I wanted to start over. Alone." I stood before her, with the endless stream of travelers behind me and the blindingly bright tarmac beyond the windows. Her hands hung at her sides, fingernails digging into her palms, leaving white crescent marks. I looked at her for a long time, until the surrounding noise seemed to recede. Until she looked back up, fresh tears gathering. From my inner pocket, I pulled out something and opened my palm. The pearl brooch lay there, its metal warm from my touch, its surface catching the overhead lights in rings like a tiny fixed moon. "You forgot this," I said. She stared at it for a long moment, and her tears stopped. She didn't reach for it, only looked, her lips slightly parted, as if something had gently bumped against her. "Let me put it on," I said. I stepped behind her and pinned the brooch to the collar of her coat. Her shoulders quivered beneath my hands. The skin at the back of her neck, bare above the collar, was almost translucent. I fastened the brooch, stepped back, and looked at her. She looked down at the brooch, then back up at me. Her face was streaked with tears, mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes, lipstick rubbed onto her chin disheveled as if she'd run through a storm. But as she looked at me, the light in her eyes was coming back, slowly, like the first sunbeam breaking through rain clouds. "Come with me," I said. Her lips moved. "What?" "Come with me. Both of us." I bent down and picked up the suitcase handle she'd dropped, gripping it tight. "That apartment in Buenos Aires, you can't live there alone. You have to save a room for me." She froze. Those reddened eyes widened, reflecting me, the lights above, the blue sky and drifting clouds beyond the glass wall. The teardrop on her lashes trembled, fell, landed beside the earlier stain on her coat, spreading another small patch. "But..." Her voice caught. "I was leaving. I was leaving you. Then take me with you," I said. "We start over together. You don't have to erase me to start over. You can start over with me." Her mouth opened, and the tears came again harder than before, streaming in large drops down her cheeks. But this time, as she cried, the corners of her mouth were curving upward. A tiny arc, hidden behind the tears, like the first sprout pushing through snow. She lifted both hands and wiped her face roughly, smearing mascara and tears across the back of her palm. Then she stepped forward and threw her arms around me. The embrace knocked me back half a step before I caught my balance. Her arms locked behind me, her face buried in my shoulder, her muffled sobs vibrating through the fabric of my coat, warm and damp. Her fingers clutched the cloth at my back, knuckles widening with tension. Slowly, I lifted my free hand and laid it on her back, my palm against her shoulder blades, feeling the rapid, hot beat of her heart. "You idiot," her voice came from the hollow of my shoulder, "you're such an idiot." "Pretty much." I rested my chin on her head and breathed in the familiar scent rose and amber, now laced with salt and damp wool. This time, it no longer smelled like a bird about to fly alone. It smelled like someone whose wings were drenched, but still beating hard to lift off again. We held each other for a long time. The flow of people eddied around us. Some glanced and looked away, Some circled our frozen stands, one or two raised phones and lowered them. The PA announced another boarding call, then a final call. I pulled back gently, using my thumb to wipe the tear tracks from her face, only smudging them further, but we both laughed. A simple laugh, clean and bright on a face still crumpled from crying. "Your flight is leaving," I said. She looked at the gate screen, then back at me. "Do you have time to buy a ticket?" "On my phone." I pulled it out, tapped the screen. Seats were still available, ridiculously expensive. I didn't even look at the price, just confirmed. The payment went through. My account balance was now exactly enough for this ticket and about 2 weeks of living expenses. Nothing left. I pocketed the phone and reached for the suitcase handle. "Let's go." She sniffled, wiped her face again with her sleeve, and fell into step beside me. We walked toward the gate, the suitcase wheels rattling across the tile in a steady, rhythmic hum. She walked half a step ahead, her coat hem swaying, the pearl brooch catching the light at her collar, bright, dim, like a small, pulsing star. The line at the gate was nearly gone. We took our place at the very end. She turned to me, her face now looser, the tightness drained away, replaced by a kind of unnameable relief, like someone who'd finally set down a load they'd been carrying too long. "Are you sure?" Her voice still had a nasal edge, but steadier now. "I'm sure. You don't speak a word of Spanish. Buying groceries will be a problem. You'll learn faster than me. You can teach me. That apartment isn't big. Only 2 rooms. One is enough for me. The other one, it faces north. You always wanted a north-facing studio." Her eyes flickered. She hadn't expected me to remember. But I did. She mentioned it many times that when she had a home, she wanted a north-facing room for painting, because the light was most stable. I'd always said in reply, but somewhere, without my knowing, that sentence had stayed lodged in a corner of my mind. She said nothing more. When it was her turn to present her boarding pass, she handed it to the attendant, then glanced back at me. I showed my mobile ticket. The attendant scanned it, nodded, and waved me through. We walked into the jet bridge together. The corridor was lit with cool white light. Circular windows along both sides offered views of the massive wing outside, the gray-blue horizon, and a few thin clouds tinted soft orange by the low sun. The metal floor vibrated faintly beneath us. A gust of wind outside produced a low howl. She stayed half a step ahead, her coat hem brushing my knee with every step, a feather-light touch, almost imperceptible, yet constant, like a silent confirmation. Inside the cabin, passengers were settling in, stowing luggage, finding seats, a child crying, a couple murmuring. The flight attendant smiled and directed her to the window seat. She slid into it, folded her coat on her lap, and leaned to look out. Ground crew in bright orange vests moved across the tarmac. On the far runway, a plane accelerated, its tail emblem glinting in the sun. I took the aisle seat beside her and buckled up. The cabin smelled of recycled air and airline packaging, not fresh, not unpleasant. She glanced at me from the corner of her eye, her lips twitching, then looked back out the window. A small movement, as if trying not to be caught. But I caught it. As the plane began its taxi, her hand rested on the armrest, fingers tapping a restless rhythm. I opened my palm and placed it on the armrest between us. Her tapping stopped. A pause of 2 seconds. Then her hand lowered into mine. Warm palm, slightly damp. I closed my fingers around it. Through the window, the city began to move slowly at first, then faster as the plane picked up speed. Runway lights slipped past in sequence. The engine roared, the fuselage vibrating. She leaned into the seat, her hand remaining in mine, her fingertip tracing a small circle on my palm, like a small creature exploring unfamiliar ground. The moment of liftoff brought a gentle weightlessness in my stomach. The ground outside tilted, shrank, the familiar urban shape folding into itself, elevated highways becoming gray threads, rooftops becoming squares, the river a silver ribbon, thinner and thinner until it vanished. She watched it all, her hand tightening in mine. When the plane broke through the clouds, sunlight poured in without filter. The whole cabin filled with gold, bright, hot, pooling over every face. She squinted, then turned to me, her silhouette limned in luminous white, her tear tracks dried, a smudge of mascara still at one corner, but her smile was beautiful. "Honey," she said. I used to think if I didn't escape that house, I'd shatter completely. And now." She thought a moment. Then she slid her hand from my palm and turned it over, rejoining our grip palm to palm, fingers laced like two keys fitting together. "Now I think I don't have to shatter. Taking you with me, maybe it'll be slower. But it's better than going alone." The engine's drone was steady, constant. Outside, clouds stretched to the horizon, white as an endless snowfield. She rested her head against the window, watching the clouds, then closed her eyes. A trace of moisture still clung to her lashes. It glinted once in the slanting light, then faded. Her breathing slowed, the dimple reappearing at the corner of her mouth. I leaned back, holding her hand. The clouds below spread in every direction. We were high enough now that everything on the ground had become distant, tiny coordinates. The needle that had lodged in my chest 3 nights ago was gone now, leaving only a small hole, and through it, a breeze entered, cool but no longer painful. That hole was closing, filling with something new, something warm. Skin healing itself. In a few hours, we would land in a city I never visited. Streets I didn't know. A language I'd only seen a few phrases of in guidebooks. A season reversed from home, where half my wardrobe would be useless. But she was beside me. Our suitcase was overhead. The crumpled flight confirmation in my pocket lay close to my heart. It wasn't all hers. Half was mine. And from today forward, there was nothing left to hide. I didn't have to pretend I didn't know where she'd been on Tuesdays. I didn't have to pretend I hadn't seen the white envelope. I didn't have to pretend, when she said "see you tonight," that I believed she'd really be back. And she no longer had to carry those days alone, those nights I'd ignored, the 103-degree fever, the 5 cold dishes scraped into the trash. I looked at her. She'd fallen asleep, her breathing even, her profile soft in the light. The pearl brooch still glinted at her collar, catching the sun through the window, its creamy white ring with faint iridescence. A flight attendant wheeled a cart down the aisle, asking for drink orders. I asked for 2 waters. I placed one on the tray table before her, took a sip from the other, cool, clearing the haze in my mind. The plane jolted slightly. Turbulence. Her brow creased, but she didn't wake, just pressed closer to the window, her hand tightening in mine unconsciously. I squeezed back, and her forehead relaxed. Outside, the clouds stretched unbroken. Somewhere below, we were flying away from the city where we lived for 7 years. The library where we met, the cafe where we courted, the tiny 1-bedroom, the house now half emptied. Those places would remain buildings, streets, streetlights. We wouldn't be back anytime soon. When we would return, and how, and in what state, I had no answers. But in this moment, we were together. Above the clouds. Heading south. I let go of her hand briefly to adjust my jacket collar, then took her hand again. She seemed to feel it in her sleep, the dimple deepening a fraction. In a few hours, the morning of Buenos Aires would greet us on the tarmac. The streets, I heard, were lined with jacaranda trees. By November, the whole city would be flooded with purple blossoms. Now it was June, winter in the southern hemisphere. No flowers. But the sun would still be good. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the engine's low hum and her steady breathing settle around me. 3 nights ago, she'd said into the phone, "In 3 days, everything will be mine." She thought everything would be hers, the apartment, the money, the freedom, the new life. She'd even forgotten her pearl brooch, clutching a one-way ticket toward the gate. But now, 3 days later, she was asleep with her hand in mine, the brooch pinned at her throat, and the plane carrying us both in the same direction. She didn't know it, But she hadn't taken everything. She took half. The other half, she left with me. And that half I was going to hold tight. Above the clouds. At 30,000 feet. In the sunlight of a new city, 2,000 miles away. In every moment, from today forward, counted anew. Outside, the clouds parted for an instant. Below, the deep blue of the ocean flashed through a gap, then vanished behind white mist again. The plane flew south, crossing latitudes, crossing time zones, crossing all the things we once believed insurmountable. She slept deeply. Her hand in mine was warm and steady. I closed my eyes too. The road ahead was still long. But we were traveling it together. 井号, after landing. Buenos Aires in winter was cooler than I'd expected. When the plane broke through the last layer of clouds, the city spread to the horizon, low buildings like countless uniform blocks, glowing in the afternoon light in warm terracotta tones. The winds passed over the Rio de la Plata, its waters reflecting a murky, heavy silver, like an old, worn mirror. She stood beside me, her lashes lifting in the first moment of waking confusion, still half dreaming. She blinked, turned to me, then her lips curved, the dimple appearing again. Are we there? Almost. She sat up, unfolded her coat from her lap, draped it over her shoulders, and touched the brooch at her collar to make sure it was still there. An unconscious gesture, as if she'd done it 100 times. The brooch caught the sunlight through the window, a soft iridescence falling on the skin above her collarbone. The landing jolt made her grip my hand, not out of fear, but confirmation. That I was still here, that I hadn't bolted down the jet bridge somewhere. I squeezed back. Her fingers tightened, then relaxed, and she started gathering her things. When the cabin door opened, the air rushed in different from what we'd left. Drier, cooler, mixed with something I couldn't identify, a distant plant scent layered over the thin exhaust of aviation fuel. We followed the flow of passengers toward arrivals, her half step ahead, coat hem brushing my knee. The suitcase wheels made a different sound on this tile, sharper, quicker. The customs line was long. We stood in silence, her shoulder occasionally brushing my arm. She had switched her phone to a local SIM and was scrolling through something in Spanish, frowning slightly as she tried to navigate the settings. I leaned in to look. Not a single word I recognized. Can you read that? About 60%. She looked up, uncertain. I took an online course for 3 months, didn't finish. Daily conversation is still rough. Then how did you buy the apartment? I used a realtor. She tapped her screen again. The realtor spoke English. The answer was so simple it was almost endearing. I laughed, and she shot me a sideways look. 星号, what are you laughing at? 星号, I schooled my face back to neutral and stared ahead at the slow-moving line. At the counter, she handed over a stack of documents and spoke to the officer in halting Spanish, filling gaps with English words. The young man listened patiently, typed, stamped, handed the papers back, and said something with an upward inflection, a question. She hesitated, glanced at me, didn't know what to answer. I shrugged at her. She turned back and smiled at him, pointed at me, then at herself, and said 2 words. The officer looked at me, at her, then broke into an understanding grin. With his mouth, he formed a word, 星号 bienvenidos 星号. He waved us through. What did you tell him? I said you're with me. She walked forward, not turning back. Not a stowaway. He believed that. He looked like he believed it. She tucked her papers into her bag, her steps lightening. The suitcase rolled behind her along an invisible track. Outside the terminal, a plaza opened up, palm fronds flapping in the wind. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, scattering moving patterns of gold on the pavement. Taxis lined up in a queue, all black, their chrome handles glittering. She hailed one, gave an address in Spanish, and the driver nodded, loading our luggage. As the cab pulled away, I leaned against the rear window. The highway was flanked by low residential blocks, walls covered in vivid graffiti, some precise as murals, others just splashes of color. Football pitches behind chain-link fences, boys in short sleeves sprinting across dried-out grass, the winter air crisp and empty but alive. She was scrolling on her phone again, then thrust the screen in front of me. Look, there's a cafe near our place with great reviews. The casual 星号 our place 星号, like she lived there for a decade. I glanced at her. She pulled the phone back and kept scrolling, the tips of her ears pink. I didn't call it out. I turned back to the window. Ahead, the city's silhouette was drawing closer, countless rooftops packed densely like a warm sea of old brick. The apartment was on a quiet central street, the building painted a soft peach pink. On the balcony railing, potted ivy hung, their leaves moving in the breeze. She fumbled with the keys, hands trembling slightly, missing the lock twice before it turned. The door opened into a dim corridor with a faint smell of new paint and what recently finished, the residue of construction still clinging.
She walked in first, flicked the wall switch. Overhead light revealed a modest living room, white walls, a light gray sofa, a low wooden coffee table, a woven rattan floor lamp in the corner that would cast patterned shadows when lit. The balcony doors were clean, showing the glow of lamps in opposite windows and the silhouette of a church spire beyond. She set her suitcase by the entrance, kicked off her shoes, and padded barefoot across the pale floor to stand in the center of the room. Quiet. She stood under that light, slowly turning, as if measuring the space with her eyes. I dragged my suitcase in and leaned it against the wall behind her. I imagined this scene, she said, almost to herself. Standing here alone, taking things out of my suitcase one by one, arranging them. I thought, the first few days might be hard, but with time, I'd get used to it. And now? She turned to face me, a strange, ambiguous smile at the corner of her lips. Now there's an extra person. I have to imagine it all over again. She walked to the end of the hallway and pushed open a white door. A small room facing an inner courtyard. The light reflected off the opposite wall, soft, even, steady. Empty except for a row of metal hooks mounted on one wall. She stood in the doorway, not stepping inside, just holding the frame and gazing through the window. Studio, she said. Studio, I repeated. She looked back at me, and something moved in her gaze, like a light beneath water. You actually remembered I said that. You said it many times. I used to think you never listened. She smiled, a shallow smile, clean as a cleared patch on a fogged window. We didn't go out for dinner that evening. She rummaged 2 packs of instant noodles from her suitcase. The kitchen had basic pots and bowls the realtor had left. She boiled water, dropped the noodles in, found 2 sausages and an egg from a box and tossed them into the pot. I watched from the doorway. Her movements were familiar, practiced, almost the same as those mornings when she fried eggs back home. But the feeling had changed. Then, her motions had been smooth but hollow, a ritual she repeated but lost feeling for. Now, as she broke the sausages into small pieces, her gestures carried a careful newness, the delicate effort of beginning again. We sat across from each other on the living room floor, knees almost touching, each with a bowl of noodle soup. Outside, the Buenos Aires night was deepening, windows lit up one by one across the way, scattered like an inverted sky. She slurped and burned her tongue, putting the bowl down to fan her mouth. Eat slower. I'm hungry. She blew on the soup, took another sip. The last time I ate was breakfast, back home. I did the math and realized she was right. From yesterday morning till now, over 24 hours, we'd eaten nothing. The airline meals we'd left untouched. I couldn't explain the absence of appetite, but now, watching her drink the soup, it felt like hunger had finally found its way back. She finished the last drop, set the bowl on the table, and leaned back into the sofa cushions with a long exhale. Then she tilted her head at me, her gaze softened by food and fatigue. Tomorrow we need to go to the supermarket, figure out where trash goes, and start your residency paperwork. She counted on her fingers. So many things. One at a time. You're not in a rush. Rushing won't help. I took the bowls to the kitchen, rinsed them in the sink, and looked back at her. We're not in a hurry anymore. She didn't reply, but the corner of her mouth lifted, half hidden as she looked down at her phone. That night, we lay in the main bedroom. The new mattress was firm, too firm, springing faintly with every turn. The curtains were not fully drawn, streetlight leaked through, painting a slanted beam on the ceiling. She lay facing me, hand resting on the pillow, breathing steady. Are you asleep? I whispered. No. What are you thinking about? A pause. I'm thinking about tomorrow morning, so much to do, I don't know where to start. Then start with the first thing. What's the first thing? Pull open the curtains, I said. See what color the sky is. She laughed, very soft, as if not to wake the silence. What kind of first thing is that? That's how every new life starts. She didn't say anything else. After a moment, her hand reached across the pillow, searching until she found my fingertips, and hooked them. Her fingers glowed in the amber streetlight, nails clean and round. I closed my hand around hers. Her breathing evened out, a low, steady sound like wind through an old alley. I lay in the dark, watching her silhouette, listening to distant dog barks and the occasional car engine from the street. All unfamiliar. Yet settling. Like an anchor lowering. I counted the day's things, deplaning, customs, the taxi, pushing open this door, looking at that north-facing room, boiling noodles, drinking hot soup on the sofa. All small, mundane tasks, scraps from an ordinary day. But the distance between this night and that night, 3 nights ago, when I stood outside the bedroom with warm milk, that distance was a river, wide and deep. The house back home was still there. The living room clock still ticking. Most of her clothes still hanging. The photos in the study drawer, untouched. If I hadn't pushed open that door, hadn't heard those words, hadn't pulled up the cloud photos or followed her through that terminal, I'd be in that study now, staring at unread emails and a message from her that read, "I've arrived, don't worry," nursing cold coffee while waiting for a letter that would take 18,000 miles to reach me. But here I was, lying on a stiff new mattress, holding her hand even in sleep, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of this city seeping through the walls. Among them, a gust rustling the ivy on the balcony, leaves brushing together with a soft, papery rustle. I closed my eyes and sank into them.
I woke first. Light had pushed through the curtains, pale gold, whiter than the light back home, filtered by the winter chill of the southern hemisphere. I slipped out of bed, walked to the living room, and pulled open the curtains. The sun flooded in, warming the gray sofa. Dust motes spun in the light shafts. On the balcony across the way, an elderly woman was watering her flowers, her silver hair shifting in the breeze. She saw me and raised her hand in a wave, her deeply lined face offering a smile so generous it seemed to belong to the morning itself. I paused, then waved back. She went back to her watering, droplets scattering into tiny rainbows in the sun. I heard her stirring in the bedroom, the soft slap of slippers across the floor. She appeared in the doorway, hair wild, eyes half shut. "What are you doing?" "Looking at the sky." I nodded toward the window. She shuffled over and stood beside me, following my gaze to the balcony across the way. The woman had gone inside, only wet leaves remained, dripping in the breeze. "What color is it?" "Pale gold," I said. "And a little blue." She nodded, then pressed her face into the hollow of my shoulder, her hair brushing my chin, worn with sleep. Her muffled voice asked, "What do you want for breakfast?" The words were blurred by fabric, soft and doughy. I didn't know. There was too much in this city I hadn't tasted yet, the coffee brands, the bread varieties, the street snacks whose names I couldn't pronounce. They were all out there, waiting, beyond that window, in the pale gold light, between the ivy leaves stirred by the wind, in the damp scent of the soil the old woman had just watered. "Let's go out," I said. "We can learn the neighborhood too." She didn't lift her head, just gave a small from her nose, then slowly raised her arms and wrapped them around my waist, her body pressing close like a plant unfurling in the warmth of the sun. Outside, the Buenos Aires morning was fully waking. Sounds began to multiply: car engines, footsteps on the pavement, a window pushed open, distant church bells. They mingled into a low, vibrant drone, the city's particular pulse. I stood there with her in my arms, a new home behind me, and before me, a whole city of sunlight. Many things still unanswered. Many roads still untraveled. But we were together. That was enough.